There are a few ideas that permanently change the way you see the world. Evolution is one of them, but only if you actually understand it. It's one of the most debated ideas of the last couple of centuries. It's talked about with ridicule, from questions like how can monkey give birth to a human, or if evolution is true while there's still monkeys around, to ones like missing links, or it's just a theory. These questions are understandable, but they deserve better answers. Let's understand evolution from first principles, and by the end of this video, you will have answers to all those questions by yourself. Let's actually start from zero. One thing we all agree upon, that life reproduces itself. That's the one rule every living thing follows. You eat, move, fight, grow, but at the base of it all, the only reason you exist is because someone before you made a copy of itself. And we do understand reproduction pretty well, how we make a copy of ourselves. The sperm meets the egg, and boom, that's your own genetic code. Before that happens, your body has to copy DNA into cells that become sperms and eggs. Copying is accurate enough to keep you you, but there are still tiny imperfections. Every time the DNA is copied, the machinery makes a few mistakes. Maybe one letter is changed, or maybe a chunk is duplicated. That's what we call mutations. We can literally say mutations are a fact. Now, most of those mutations are neutral. They don't matter, while some of those mutations turn out to be detrimental, which we call genetic disease. But every now and then, there are mutations which are beneficial. I think we would all agree on our second premise too, that when living beings reproduce, the genetic information mutates. Some of its mutations are bad for survival, while some are good. This is pure logic and biology. Now, if you live in a world where being slightly faster, or having slightly thicker fur, or digesting food slightly better helps you survive, then those helpful changes increases the odds that you will reproduce. Which means organisms with those beneficial changes will have an advantage over others, and their population will start replacing the group without those changes. Now let's pause and tell me if you agree with me on all these premises. Premise 1. Living organisms reproduce. Premise 2. During reproduction, the genetic information that is passed down mutates. Of those mutations, most are neutral, some are bad while some are good for survival. Premise 3. Individuals with mutations that are good for survival are more likely to survive and reproduce. So what do you think should be the conclusion of all these premises? Simple. That mutations create differences, and the individuals with beneficial changes propagate more easily and spread through the population, gradually replacing the versions without them. And there we go. That's it. That's the theory of evolution for you. Random mutation and natural selection. And it's important to note, this isn't just a theory about monkeys or fossils. It's a statement about logic. If reproduction and variation exist, then evolution must happen. It's unavoidable. And now once those differences exist, nature tests them. Not consciously, of course, there are no intentions. It's just that environment puts pressure on living things. So up until now, we have established how theory of evolution is a mechanism that is not just logical, but inevitable, which means we would at least all agree that organisms evolve. Now here is the next question you should ask. The theory of evolution can explain why organisms change, but that does not explain the diversity we see in the life on Earth. Like, why don't they all blur into one single giant species? Why would there be an indistinct species in the first place, even if organisms evolve? That's a very important question, but the main answer is again very simple. Geographic isolation. So what happens is, sometimes populations get split by distance, a river, a mountain, and islands. Once that happens, two groups stop exchanging genes, and then they evolve separately. Different mutations show up in each group, different environment reward different traits, and given enough time, they change so much that even if they meet again, they can no longer reproduce with each other. That's what we call speciation. Geographic isolation is one of the most powerful way new species form. You can see this in real life. Darwin's finches on Galapagos Islands, for example. They were separated on different islands. Each evolved slightly different beaks based on what food was available. Or look at bonobos and chimpanzees. They were separated by a river, and that's how they acquired vastly different behaviors. They were split from a common ancestor about 1 or 2 million years ago. Geographic isolation creates differences, and reproductive incompatibility, which eventually happens given enough time, locks the differences in. So now, if you stack this process over billions of years, tiny variations, constant selection, occasional isolation, what you get is not a one straight line of progress, but a tree. Now here's the next question you would ask. Okay, evolution occurs, species get formed, but that still doesn't mean that all living beings, or even all primates, share a common origin. How do you arrive at that conclusion? That's again a very important question, and to answer that, we don't rely on just one line of evidence. We have layers of evidence, starting with the genetics. All living things use the same 4 DNA letters, A, T, C, G. If you take a human gene and stick it into a bacterium, the bacterium can actually read it, because the language of DNA is universal. And that's not what you would expect if every life form was separately designed. But that's exactly what you would expect if all life descended from a common ancestor. That's our first clue for common origin, the universality of life's basic machinery. Then there is the fossil record, which, despite what people say, does show a predictable pattern. We have fossils that fill in the gaps between major groups. Evolution says what we should find, and we do. Tiktaalics between fish and amphibians, feathered dinosaurs between reptiles and birds, and the whale lineage showing land mammals sliding back into the sea. Even humans from Australopithecus to Homo erectus. These are not some isolated fossils. These are physical, measurable transitions. And in spite of the number of fossils we do have, we of course don't have fossils for every species that existed. Because fossilization is a very rare event. People can always come asking for fossils for more intermediate species. That's a never-ending search. But the important point is that every fossil we do have fits into the larger evolutionary picture. They point in the same direction, towards the large-scale changes or macroevolution. And even if you completely ignore fossils, DNA alone is enough to reconstruct life's family tree with astonishing accuracy. Take any gene, from hemoglobin to mitochondrial DNA, compare its sequence across species, and you can build an evolutionary tree. What's remarkable is that when you repeat this with hundreds of different genes, they all independently produce almost the exact same branching pattern. And genetics and fossils are not the only place where we see this pattern. You can see evolution written directly into the bodies of animals alive today. Humans still carry a tailbone. Whales still have tiny hidden pelvises meant for legs they no longer have. And flightless birds like ostriches still grow wings they can't use. These leftovers only make sense if they're inherited from ancestors who did use them. Furthermore, even embryos tell us about our common origin. Human embryos grow a tail, fish-like arches, and limb patterns that match the early stage of other vertebrates. Different species all start from the same basic blueprint, which means they must have inherited that blueprint from a shared ancestor. And now, when we try to make a family tree of species, using fossils, genetics, comparative anatomy, embryology, completely different fields, all independently point to the exact same branching pattern of life. And we have no reason to think that it's just a coincidence. When every line of evidence we have, and we have many, converges on the same family tree, and we have no conclusive evidence pointing in the opposite direction, the conclusion becomes pretty straightforward. All life shares a common origin, because that is the best explanation we have. We have no reason to think otherwise. Now we understand how we arrive at the common ancestry. Up until I'd expect you to agree with me on 3 points we've discussed so far: the mechanism of evolution, speciation, and common origin. If you agree with me on all 3 points, you would have to agree that every species that exists or has ever existed is one branch on that tree. Some branches died, some split, some survived to the present day. That's why we say humans did not come from monkeys. We and monkeys share a common ancestor, a species that lived millions of years ago. We're split into separate populations that evolved in different directions. One of those lines led to monkeys we see today, another led to us. And to those who say, why monkeys don't become humans? Remember that evolution does not have a goal. It doesn't necessarily lead to intelligence. It just optimizes the population in the given environment and the given mutations. Every species is adapted to its own environment. Now your next question should be, okay, we evolved, we have a common origin, but how did the tree even start in the first place? To evolve and to have a common origin, there must be a point at which this all must have started. This is again a very important question, and a very tricky one, because how did life begin in the first place? We don't exactly understand. We have a leading hypothesis called abiogenesis, but it's active research. I can't explain to you in detail here, as this is a topic so huge that it will require a separate video. But in short, I can tell you that it talks about how life probably began from inorganic substances. Now, a lot of people would quickly come to the conclusion, see, we don't know, which means evolution is false. No. Not knowing every detail of origin doesn't undo everything we see after the origin. Missing the first few chapters of the book doesn't make the rest unreadable. And the book is long, 4 billion years long. That's another problem. A lot of people can't comprehend evolution intuitively because the time scales we're talking about is not intuitive to us at all. If Earth's 4.5 billion years were a 24-hour day, life starts at 4 a.m., multicellular stuff shows up at around 8 p.m., dinosaurs at 10:30, and humans at the last second before midnight. That's how slow this is, and that's how new we are on Earth. That's why people struggle to feel it. Once you understand that small changes over unfathomable time add up, it suddenly becomes intuitive. Even after all of this, if somebody would come to me and say, okay, everything you said is fine, but in the end, it's just a theory. To those, I want to say, we should differentiate between a theory and a hypothesis. A theory is a hypothesis supported by evidence. And that's how far we can go when talking about events from the past. Because for things to become a fact, we'll have to observe them. And unfortunately, we did not have a time machine to go back in the past and observe macroevolution throughout those years. The most you can do is infer from the evidence we have today from the past, and try to find out the best possible inference, the most consistent and coherent one. That's what the theory of evolution is. The best possible inference. It's not a fact when it comes to macroevolution, but it's as close to being a fact as the explanation of any historical event could be. Furthermore, the small-scale side of evolution, what we call microevolution, is already an observed fact. We literally watch bacteria, insects, and even some animals evolve in real time. And if you still feel evolution is too abstract, just look at the artificial selection, the version humans do. Dogs did not exist 15,000 years ago. Every breed you see today, pugs, huskies, chihuahuas, Great Danes, all come from wolves. Not because wolves magically transformed one day, no, but because humans decided which wolves get to reproduce. Friendlier ones, smaller ones, ones with shorter snouts. They bred those again and again for thousands of years, and we suddenly get new shapes, behaviors, new types of animals. That's evolution. Artificial selection is selections with humans choosing the direction. If such a dramatic change can happen in just a few thousand years, imagine millions of years under natural selection. In the end, I just want you to see how inevitability alone can build complexity. What it really shows is that you're not separate from nature. You are nature. You're made of atoms that learn to copy themselves, compete, and change. until one day they became aware enough to ask where they come from. That's evolution. It's simple, it's logical, and once you see it from first principles, it's impossible to unsee.